Kicked out at 14, he bought a forgotten root cellar for $40. What it became changed everything. If you've ever felt like you were starting from absolute zero, with nothing but a key to a door you've never seen, I want you to stick around. This story is for you. And if you feel that connection, maybe consider subscribing. We talk about real things here, and your story matters as much as mine. The day I turned 18, the world gave me a cardboard box and a bus token. That was it. My graduation present from the state of Illinois. 2 years in a group home, preceded by 2 years in another, and a scattered handful of foster placements before that. It all ended not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a door closing behind me and the polite, tired smile of my case manager, Mr. Henderson. He'd signed the paperwork, handed me my birth certificate, my social security card, and a thin manila envelope containing $73 and change, the remainder of a state-provided allowance I'd barely touched. "You're a man now, Sam," he'd said, his voice trying for warmth but landing somewhere near administrative finality. "The world's open to you." He pointed at the box. It held 2 pairs of jeans, a few t-shirts, a worn copy of a book my grandfather used to read to me, and one other thing. A small, lacquered wooden box, no bigger than my hand. It was the only thing I truly owned. The only thing that had made the journey with me through every placement, every new bedroom that never felt like mine. The world didn't feel open. It felt like a sheer cliff face I was expected to climb with my bare hands. I stood on the sidewalk outside the Thomas M. Riley Center for Boys, the February air so cold it felt like a physical slap. The sky was the color of dirty dishwater. The bus token felt heavy and useless in my palm. A man. I didn't feel like a man. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edge of a life that was supposed to be mine, but that I had no idea how to start. For a few minutes I just stood there, the box digging into my hip. Other boys had family come for them on their 18th. A cousin with a beat-up sedan, an aunt who'd cry and hug them, a father who'd clap them on the back. My family was a memory. My mom had disappeared into a fog of grief and bad choices after my grandfather died, and my dad was a name on a birth certificate I'd never met. My grandfather, he was the one who had been my world, and he was gone. I walked to the bus station, the city noise a dull roar in my ears. Everyone seemed to have a destination, a purpose. I had a bus token and $73. My plan, such as it was, extended as far as the public library. It was warm, and you could stay there all day as long as you pretended to be reading. I could figure out the next step from there. A shelter maybe. A job application at a fast food place. The first rung on a ladder that started somewhere deep underground. Sitting in the hard plastic chair at the bus station, I placed the cardboard box on my lap and opened the small wooden one from inside it. The scent of cedar and old paper filled my nose, a smell so familiar it was almost painful. It was the smell of my grandfather. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were 2 items. A single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key, its shaft thick and its teeth crudely cut, and a folded piece of paper, thick and yellowed with age. I unfolded it carefully. It was a bill of sale, drawn up in my grandfather's spidery, elegant handwriting, and notarized with a stamp at the bottom. It recorded the sale of one property, listed by a parcel number and a vague description. The structure and land commonly known as the old root cellar, west of the creek line. The seller was my grandfather, Joseph Miller. The buyer was me, Samuel Miller. The purchase price was $40. The date was October 12th, 4 years ago. The day before he died. The day before my life fell apart. I remembered that day. He was in his bed, the room smelling of sickness and Vicks Vapo Rub. He'd been so thin, his skin like parchment over his bones. He had called me over, his voice a dry whisper. He pressed 2 $20 bills into my hand, their creases stiff and new. "I'm selling you the old Cellar, Sammy," he'd rasped. "You need to buy it from me. It's important. A real sale." He made me hand the money right back to him. He had me sign the paper where his trembling finger pointed. It felt like a game, a strange, sad fantasy of a dying man. I was 14. I thought he was just confused, lost in his memories of the farm we'd lost years before. I signed it to make him happy. His lawyer, a woman I'd never seen before, was there. She watched with sad eyes, then stamped the paper and folded it, tucking it into the wooden box with the key. "You keep this, Sam," my grandfather had whispered, his grip surprisingly strong on my wrist. "Don't you ever lose it. Don't you ever sell it, not unless you have to. One day, you'll understand." He died the next morning, and I never did understand. In the chaos that followed, with my mother's breakdown and my entry into the system, the box was my only anchor. A nonsensical promise to a dead man. A key to a hole in the ground that probably didn't even exist anymore, on land we didn't own. The $40 felt like a joke. Now, sitting in the bus station, it felt like the only thing in the world that was mine. A legal document, a transaction. I, Samuel Miller, was a property owner. I traced the parcel number with my finger. It was just a string of digits, but it felt more real than the bus token, more real than the $73. For 4 years, I'd held onto it as a memory, a keepsake. But Mr. Henderson's words echoed in my head. The world's open to you. What if it wasn't a memory? What if it was a map? I stood up, leaving the cardboard box on the chair, and walked over to the ticket counter. The woman behind the glass looked as tired as Mr. Henderson had. "Can you tell me where this is?" I asked, pushing the bill of sale under the glass. I pointed to the county and township name written below the parcel number. Blackwood County. It was a place I'd only heard my grandfather talk about in stories. It was 300 miles west, a different world of cornfields and forests, a place we'd left behind when I was just a little kid. She squinted at the paper. "Blackwood? Honey, that's the sticks. Nothing out there." She typed something into her computer. "Nearest stop is a town called Haven. 1 bus a day, leaves at 6 a.m., gets in around noon." "How much is a one-way ticket?" I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. $52, she said, looking back at me, probably seeing the threadbare jacket and the anxiety in my eyes. $52. It would leave me with $21 and a key to a root cellar in the middle of nowhere. It was the stupidest, most irresponsible thing I could possibly do. The library was the smart choice. The shelter was the responsible choice. A slow, careful climb out of the hole. But my grandfather's voice was in my ear. "One day, you'll understand." I thought about the last 4 years, the beige walls of the group homes, the nights spent listening to other boys crying or yelling in their sleep, the feeling of being a file in a cabinet, a case number, a problem to be managed until I was 18. All of it was safe. All of it was sensible. And all of it was a cage. This was a leap into the dark, a wild, desperate bet on the last words of the only person who had ever truly seen me. "I'll take it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "One way to Haven." I spent the night in the bus station, curled up in a corner with my box on my stomach, the iron key clutched in my hand. I didn't sleep. I just watched the clock tick toward 6 a.m., toward a future that was either a new beginning or the most foolish mistake of my life. As the first gray light of dawn broke over the city, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't quite hope. It was more like agency. For the first time in 4 years, I was the one making the choice. I was following my own map, even if it led straight into the ground. The bus ride was a 6-hour journey from one reality to another. The concrete and steel of the city slowly gave way to skeletal winter suburbs, then to flat, endless plains of frozen farmland. The snow lay in a thin, dirty crust over the harvested cornfields, the sky a vast, unforgiving sheet of white. I watched the world go by, my forehead pressed against the cold glass. The other passengers were few and far between. An old woman knitting, a young soldier in uniform sleeping with his mouth open, a mother trying to quiet a restless child. Each of them seemed to have a place in the world they were moving toward. I was moving toward a question mark. With every mile, the anxiety grew. What was I doing? I had $21 in my pocket. I had no phone. I knew no one in Haven. What if the root cellar was gone? What if it was on some private farm and the owner ran me off with a shotgun? What if it was just a collapsed hole filled with mud and dead leaves? The what-ifs were a swarm of angry bees in my head. I took out the wooden box again and opened it, just to look at the key and the deed. The solid weight of the iron, the crisp authority of the notarized paper. It was real. The transaction was real. My grandfather had done this for a reason. I had to believe that. I tried to remember him talking about the old farm. His stories were always tinged with sadness. He'd talk about the big white farmhouse, the massive red barn, the creek where he and my grandmother had picnicked. He'd lost it all before I was born. Bad investments, a couple of dry years, a bank that wouldn't wait. He never talked about the details of the loss, only the ache of it. He never mentioned a root cellar, not once. Why would this one small piece of the lost land be so important? And how had he held on to it? The bus pulled into Haven just after noon. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road, a single main street with a handful of brick buildings, a post office, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store, and a small grocery. A single blinking traffic light swayed in the wind. I stepped off the bus, and the cold hit me again. But this air was different. It was clean, sharp, smelling of wood smoke and frozen earth. The silence was the most shocking thing. After years in the city, the quiet felt immense, like a physical presence. I slung my box under my arm and walked into the diner. It was warm inside, smelling of coffee and fried bacon. A few old men in flannel shirts sat at the counter, their conversation stopping the moment I walked in. They watched me with open, unhurried curiosity. I felt like an alien. I sat in a booth by the window and ordered a coffee. It cost $2, but the warmth of the mug in my hands was worth it. "You're not from around here," the waitress said. It wasn't a question. She was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a tired slump to her shoulders. "No, ma'am," I said. "Just arrived." "Passing through?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure. I'm looking for a piece of property. My grandfather owned it." This piqued the interest of the men at the counter. One of them swiveled on his stool. "Who was your grandfather?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Joseph Miller," I said. The name caused a ripple of recognition. The old man nodded slowly. Joe Miller, sure. Haven't heard that name in 20 years. He lost the old place, moved away. Shame, that was. I know, I said, but he kept a small piece of it. He sold it to me before he passed. The old root cellar, west of the creek. The man frowned, thinking. The root cellar? I'll be. I remember that thing. Sat on a little rise out past the old north field. Nobody's been out that way in forever. The access road is probably all grown over. He looked at me, a flicker of pity in his eyes. Son, that land's been picked over by the banks and developers for years. You sure that paper you got is worth anything? It was notarized, I said, a little defensively. Well, that's something, I suppose. He turned back to his coffee. The message was clear. I was a fool on a fool's errand. I finished my coffee, paid the waitress, and asked her for directions to the county courthouse. It was a small, neat brick building next to the post office. I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. This was the moment of truth. Either the deed was real, or it was just a piece of sentimental paper. The county clerk's office was a single room, lined with massive, dusty binders. The woman at the desk was younger than the waitress, but had the same look of steady, small-town competence. I explained my situation, my voice feeling small and thin in the high-ceilinged room. I showed her the bill of sale. She took it and examined it closely, her expression unreadable. Joseph Miller, she murmured, then typed the name into her computer. She clicked a few times. Then she looked at the parcel number on my deed and typed that in. She was quiet for a long time, just reading the screen. Well, I'll be, she said finally, looking up at me. It's real. Your grandfather sold you parcel 7B-441, 0.7 acres. The title is free and clear. He paid the property taxes on it every year, right up until he passed. They've been delinquent for the last 4 years, but since the value is assessed at practically nothing, the total due is only $160. If you pay that, the land is yours. No liens, no disputes. She leaned forward, a hint of a smile on her face. Congratulations, Mr. Miller. You own a piece of Blackwood County. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. It was real. It was mine. Can you show me where it is on a map? She pulled out a large plat map from a drawer and spread it on the counter. She traced the lines with her finger, past the big rectangle that had been the old Miller farm, now subdivided into smaller plots owned by a corporation called Mountain View Development, LLC. And there, right on the edge, was a tiny, oddly shaped square. My square. Parcel 7B-441. It's right here, she said. About 3 miles out of town. You follow Old Creek Road until you hit the tree line. There used to be a farm lane that went back, but I imagine it's long gone. You'll have to walk it. I paid the back taxes. My $21 became negative $139, but I didn't care. I had a debt, but I also had a deed. I had a piece of the earth that belonged to me. I thanked the clerk, folded my receipt into the wooden box with the deed and the key, and walked out of the courthouse into the cold afternoon sun. For the first time, I felt the faintest glimmer of what it might be like to have a home. The walk was longer than I expected. The sun was already starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the snow-covered fields in shades of orange and pink. The air grew colder. My thin jacket was no match for the wind that swept across the open land. My ears and fingers started to burn with the cold. I followed the cracked pavement of Old Creek Road, my worn sneakers crunching on the gravel shoulder. There were no cars, no signs of life, just the stark beauty of the winter landscape. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A dense line of trees marking the edge of the old farm property. And just as the old man in the diner had predicted, the access road was nothing more than a faint indentation in the earth, choked with thorns and tangled brush. I pushed my way through, the branches scratching at my face and clothes. The sun was setting fast now, and the woods were growing dark and foreboding. I walked for another 10 minutes, following the ghost of the old lane. The ground sloped upward, and then I saw it. On a small cleared rise, surrounded by skeletal oak trees, stood a small dilapidated structure. It wasn't a cellar door set into the ground, as I'd imagined. It was a shack, a tiny cabin, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. Its roof sagged in the middle, its walls were weathered to a silver gray, and one of the windows was boarded up. It looked abandoned, forgotten, on the verge of collapse. My heart sank. This was it? This was the grand inheritance? A falling down shed? I circled it cautiously. The snow around it was undisturbed. No one had been here for a very long time. There was a single door on the front, its wood swollen and cracked. A heavy padlock, rusted solid, held it shut. This couldn't be right. The key I had was an old-fashioned skeleton key, not one for a padlock. Disappointment, cold and bitter, washed over me. I had spent my last dollar, walked for miles. For this? A locked, rotting shack. I kicked at the base of the door in frustration. The wood was soft, punky. I was about to turn away, to admit defeat and start the long, dark walk back to a town where I knew no one, when my foot hit something solid under the thin layer of snow and dead leaves. I knelt down and brushed the debris away. It was a flat, heavy flagstone, different from the surrounding earth. My fingers, numb with cold, scrabbled at the edge. It was heavy, but it shifted. I got my fingertips underneath and pulled. It lifted, revealing a dark, square hole. And set into the wooden frame of the hole was a lock. A heavy iron plate lock, old and ornate. It was a keyhole, not for a padlock. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I scrambled for the wooden box, my fingers fumbling with the clasp. I took out the iron key. It looked ancient, like something from a pirate story. With a trembling hand, I pushed it into the lock. It slid in perfectly. I turned it. There was a loud, grating, metallic clunk that echoed in the silent woods. A mechanism deep within the frame had shifted. Beneath the flagstone wasn't just a lock. It was a set of low, heavy wooden doors set flush with the ground. A storm cellar, a root cellar. I heaved one of the doors open. It swung upward on protesting hinges, revealing a set of steep stone steps leading down into absolute blackness. A wave of cold, musty air washed over me, a smell of damp earth, stone, and something else. Something clean, like preserved wood. My grandfather's words again. One day, you'll understand. I didn't have a flashlight. The last of the daylight was gone. I stood at the edge of the darkness, the key still in my hand, my mind reeling. The shack was a decoy, a distraction. The real property, the thing he had sold me, was under my feet. I had no idea what I would find down there, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't walking back to town. I was home. I needed light, and I needed to get out of the killing cold. I looked back at the shack. The padlock on the door was old and rusted. I found a heavy rock nearby and began hammering at the hasp. The metal was brittle from years of exposure. After a dozen blows, it snapped. The door swung inward with a groan. The inside of the shack was even more derelict than the outside. It was empty, save for a thick carpet of dust, leaves, and mouse droppings. But in one corner, tucked under a small, grimy workbench, I found a treasure. An old metal toolbox. It was heavy. I pried open the rusted clasps. Inside, neatly organized, were basic hand tools: a hammer, screwdrivers, a wrench, and, to my immense relief, a heavy-duty flashlight and a half-full book of matches. Next to them was a small, sealed tin of what looked like kerosene and an old storm lantern. It was a kit, a deliberately placed survival kit. My grandfather hadn't just left me a key, he'd left me the means to use it. The thought was so overwhelming, the foresight so loving, that I had to sit down on the dusty floor for a moment. He had pictured this exact scenario, me, alone, in the dark, needing help, and he had provided it. I clicked on the flashlight. A strong, bright beam cut through the gloom. I took a deep breath and walked back to the open cellar doors. I pointed the light down the stone steps. They were steep but solid, carved from the earth and lined with fieldstone. 10 steps down, they ended on a packed dirt floor. The space that opened up before me wasn't a root cellar, not just a root cellar. The flashlight beam swept across a room, maybe 20 feet long by 15 feet wide. The walls were smooth, poured concrete, not rough stone. The ceiling was reinforced with thick wooden beams. It was dry, shockingly, miraculously dry. In one corner stood a small, pot-bellied wood stove, a neat stack of firewood beside it. Along the far wall was a sturdy-looking wooden bunk bed with 2 thin mattresses rolled up on top. Next to it was a small table and 2 simple chairs. On the table sat a large, sealed metal footlocker. It was a room, a hidden underground room, a shelter, a bunker. I descended the steps, my footsteps the only sound. The air was still and cold, but it was a contained cold, free from the biting wind outside. I ran my hand along the concrete wall. It was cool and smooth. This had been built, carefully, deliberately. This had taken time and money and a great deal of effort. Why go to all that trouble and then hide it, letting a derelict shack serve as its cover? My flashlight beam fell back on the metal footlocker on the table. It was army green, with heavy latches on the front. It wasn't locked. I lifted the latches, the sound loud in the silent room, and raised the heavy lid. The contents were organized with the same meticulous care as the toolbox. On top was a thick, folded wool blanket. Underneath that, several large, sealed plastic containers. I opened one. It was filled with canned goods, beans, soup, vegetables, fruit. Another held bags of rice and pasta. A third held medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic wipes, pain relievers. There were jugs of water, a manual can opener, a set of metal plates and cutlery, and a small camping stove with extra fuel canisters. It was years' worth of supplies, enough for someone to live down here for a long, long time. And at the very bottom, lying flat, was a large, sealed envelope made of thick, waterproof material. My name was written on the front in my grandfather's hand. Samuel Miller, for when you get here. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. I ripped the seal. Inside were 2 things: a thick stack of $100 bills held together with a rubber band, and a letter, several pages long, written on crisp white paper. I sat down on one of the simple wooden chairs, the flashlight propped on the table, its beam illuminating the pages. I counted the money first. It was $10,000. More money than I had ever seen in my life. Enough to change everything. Enough to start over, to get an apartment, to go to community college. Enough to walk away from this cold, dark hole in the ground and never look back. Then I began to read the letter. "My dearest Sam," it began. "If you are reading this, then it means two things. First, that I am gone. And for that, I am more sorry than words can say. Second, it means you found your way home. I pray that you did not have too hard a time of it. I know you must have 1,000 questions. Why this place? Why the secret? Why did I make you buy a root cellar for $40? I will try to explain. What I am about to tell you is a story I was never proud of, Sam. It is a story of failure and fear. When you were a baby, I didn't just lose the farm. I was ruined. I made a bad deal with a man I thought was a friend, and he and the bank together took everything. The house, the barn, the fields, all of it. But it was worse than that. I owed more than the farm was worth. I was hounded by creditors for years. They threatened me. They threatened your grandmother. And I lived in constant fear that they would find a way to take anything I ever managed to earn. I was a proud man, Sam, and that shame nearly broke me. But I had to have something left, a final place, a secret I could keep. So, over the course of 5 years, working odd jobs for cash, I built this place. I bought this little scrap of worthless land under a different name, then transferred it back to myself when the legal trouble had quieted down. I told everyone I was building a storm cellar, something the old farmhouse had lacked. I dug it myself, with a shovel and a wheelbarrow. I paid cash for the concrete, a little at a time. I built the forms, poured the walls, set the beams. I built it to last. I built it to be a fortress, a place no one could ever take away. The shack on top is a lie, designed to make the plot look abandoned and worthless. No one wants to foreclose on a collapsed shed. This place was my secret hope. But then you came along, and it became my secret hope for you. I saw the world getting harder, colder. I saw your mother struggling, and I knew that one day you might find yourself alone. I couldn't bear that thought. A man needs a place to stand, a place that is his own. When I got sick, I knew I was running out of time. I couldn't just leave it to you in a will. The old debts, the creditors, they might have lawyers who could find a way to claw it back, to claim it was part of my estate. So I had my lawyer, a good and honest woman, draw up that bill of sale. By selling it to you, for real money, it became your property, legally and forever, before I died. It was a transaction, separate from any inheritance. The $40 was the price of your freedom, Sam. The price of this place. It's the best money I ever spent. The money in this envelope is what I have left. It's not much, but I saved it for you. It is for you to start again. You can take it and go. Go to college, find a trade, build a life for yourself anywhere you want. No one would blame you. This is a hard place, a lonely place. But you can also stay. This land is yours. This shelter is yours. It is a home if you choose to make it one. It is a foundation. It's not the legacy I wanted to give you. I wanted to give you the whole farm, the sun on your face, the smell of hay in the barn. All I have to give you is this hole in the ground. But it is yours, unconditionally. Whatever you choose, know this. I have loved you every day of your life. I am proud of the man you are becoming. Be good, be strong, and never forget that you have a place to stand. All my love, Grandpa Joe. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. I cried for the grandfather I missed so much. I cried for the shame and fear he must have lived with. I cried for the immense, secret, and painstaking love that had gone into building this hidden room. He hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't left me with nothing. He had spent his last years building me an ark. The grief was a physical weight, but underneath it, something else was taking root. A fierce, protective pride. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a monument to his love. It was the last piece of him left on earth. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and looked around the room again. It didn't look like a dark hole anymore. It looked like a promise. The neatly stacked firewood, the cans of food, the clean blankets. Every single object was a testament, a message. I thought of you. I prepared for you. You are not alone. I unrolled one of the mattresses onto the bottom bunk. I set up the storm lantern and lit it, its soft golden light pushing back the shadows and making the concrete walls feel almost warm. The $10,000 sat on the table, a silent, potent question. I could leave. I could be in a warm apartment in a new city by the end of the week. I could have a normal life. No one would ever have to know about the secret cellar. But how could I leave? How could I turn my back on this? It felt like turning my back on him. This was more than just land and a building. It was a story, my story, and his. Selling it or abandoning it would be like tearing out the last page. My thoughts were interrupted by a sound from above, a rustling, a piece of wood creaking. I froze, my heart pounding. Was someone up there? In the shack? I doused the lantern, plunging the room into darkness, and grabbed the heavy flashlight, holding it like a club. I crept up the stone steps, my ears straining in the silence. The cellar door was still open, a pale rectangle of starry sky above. I heard another sound, the crunch of snow. A car engine, idling, not far away. Headlights swept through the trees, casting long, dancing shadows. My blood ran cold. Who would be out here in the middle of the night? I crouched in the shadows of the cellar entrance, peering out. A large, dark SUV was parked where the lane met the woods. 2 figures got out. They had powerful flashlights, their beams cutting sharp cones through the darkness. They started walking toward the shack. "You sure this is the plot, Henderson?" one of them said, his voice a low, impatient growl. "This is it," the other replied. His voice was familiar. I leaned forward, my stomach twisting into a knot. I knew that voice. It was Mr. Henderson, my case manager. "Looks like a pile of junk," the first man grumbled. "Why boss wants this little scrap so bad is beyond me. Mountain View wants the whole tract for the new resort development," Henderson said, his tone no longer the tired, polite one I knew, but something colder, more businesslike. "This is the last holdout, an unresolved title from an old delinquent estate. The kid, the grandson, aged out today. He has no idea it's worth anything. He's got no family, no money. He'll be desperate." My mind reeled. Henderson? How did he know? "So what's the plan?" the other man asked. "The kid has the deed. We need it. My contact at the county clerk's office says he came in today, paid the back taxes. He's here somewhere, probably trying to sleep in that wreck of a shack." Henderson's flashlight beam played over the shack door, which I had foolishly left swinging open. "There, see? Kid's a ghost. No phone, no credit cards. We find him, We offer him 10 grand, maybe 15.
He'll think it's the lottery.
He signs a quitclaim deed. We get our clean title, and the resort goes forward. Easy. And if he doesn't want to sell? There was a pause. Henderson laughed, a short, ugly sound. He's an 18-year-old homeless kid with $70 to his name. What's he going to do? Fight the Mountain View legal team? He'll sell. They were at the shack now. They shone their lights inside. He's not in here. Toolbox is open, though. He was definitely here. Check around, the first man ordered. Maybe he got spooked and is hiding in the woods. Wouldn't last long in this cold. I sank back down into the darkness of the cellar, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and white-hot rage. Henderson. He had known all along. He had been playing me. He wasn't a tired caseworker. He was a scout for a predator. The $73, the bus token, the patronizing, "The world is open to you." It was all a lie, designed to send me into the wilderness, vulnerable and desperate, ready to be devoured. And the offer, $10,000, the exact amount my grandfather had left me. The irony was so bitter it tasted like bile. They were offering me my own inheritance as a buyout. They thought I was just another piece on their board, a problem to be managed and discarded. The beam of a flashlight cut across the cellar opening. I flattened myself against the cold concrete wall, holding my breath. "What's this?" It was Henderson's voice, right above me. "Looks like a cellar door. I thought the report said it was just a shack." "Get it open," the other man grunted. I heard them fumbling with the heavy wooden door. They were strong. The door groaned as they forced it fully open, flooding the top of the stairs with the harsh, cold light of their flashlights. I was trapped. This is it, I thought. This is the choice. Not the one in my grandfather's letter, between leaving and staying. This was a different choice, between being a victim and fighting back. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. A man needs a place to stand. They thought I was a homeless kid. They thought I was alone and desperate. They were wrong. I was standing in my own home, and I was not alone. I had my grandfather's legacy all around me. I had his love, his foresight, and his anger. My fear began to burn away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about justice. This was about honoring the man who had built this place for me. I looked at the $10,000 on the table, my grandfather's money. Then I looked at the heavy iron flashlight in my hand. They were coming down the steps. Now, I want to pause here for a second, because this was a turning point. And maybe you've had a moment like this in your own life. A moment where you realize the system you thought was there to help you is actually working against you. A moment where you're told you're worthless, that you have no power, that your only option is to take the scraps they offer you. If you've ever felt that, I want you to drop a comment below and just write, "I understand." Because you are not alone in that feeling. This community, this channel, it's for everyone who's ever had to find their own strength when the world tried to count them out. Your story matters, so let us know you're here. Okay, let's get back to it. Their boots were on the stone steps, 2 sets of them, heavy and confident. "Hello?" Henderson called out, his voice laced with false concern. "Anyone down here? We're from the county, just checking on the property." A lie. Another lie. Everything out of his mouth was a lie. I stayed silent, hidden in the deepest shadow behind the stairs. The beams of their flashlights swept the room, illuminating the bunk beds, the stove, the cans of food. "What the hell is this?" the other man said, his voice low with surprise. "This isn't a root cellar. This is some kind of bunker." "Look at all this," Henderson said, his light lingering on the supplies. "Someone's been planning to stay here." His voice lost its fake warmth. It was sharp now, annoyed. The kid. He must have known. But how? Their lights found the footlocker, the open letter, the stack of money on the table. Well, well, the first man chuckled. Looks like Grandpa left him a little nest egg. He walked over and picked up the stack of cash, riffling through it with his thumb. 10 grand. Our offer just got cheaper. That was it. That was the moment the last of my fear vanished, burned away by pure fury. He was holding my grandfather's sacrifice in his grimy hands, mocking it. I stepped out from behind the stairs. Put it down, I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was low and steady, filled with a coldness that surprised even me. They both spun around, startled. Their flashlight beams hit me, blinding me. There you are, kid, Henderson said, recovering quickly. He tried to put on his caseworker's smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sam, you gave us a scare. We were worried about you, out here all alone. You're a liar, I said, not moving. I heard you, up at the shack. You're not here to help me. You're here to cheat me. The other man, a big, broad-shouldered guy in a black parka, took a step forward. Listen, kid, let's not make this difficult. We have a very generous offer for you. This land, it's worthless. But the company I work for, Mountain View, they're willing to give you $15,000 for it, a gesture of goodwill. He said 10,000 before, I said, looking straight at Henderson. Henderson's smile faltered. His face hardened. The offer is 15,000. It's more money than you'll see in your whole life. You sign the paper, you take the cash, you walk away and start over. It's the best deal you're ever going to get. No, I said. The word hung in the air. Simple. Final. The big man laughed. No? Kid, you don't get it. This isn't a negotiation. We're going to get this land, one way or another. You can take the money and have a nice life, or you can have nothing. Your choice. It's already my choice, I said, my voice gaining strength. And I choose to stay. This is my home. It was my grandfather's. Now it's mine. You are trespassing. Get out. Henderson took a step forward, his face contorted with anger. You ungrateful little punk. After everything the state did for you, this is the thanks we get? I'm trying to help you. You have nothing. You are nothing. You're going to end up on the street, and this hole will be filled with concrete. This hole, I said, my gaze sweeping the room, is worth more than you could ever understand. It was built with love, something you clearly know nothing about. I pointed the heavy flashlight at the big man's hand. Now put my grandfather's money back on the table and get out of my house. The big man looked at Henderson. Henderson gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The man's face twisted into a sneer. He dropped the money on the floor, the bills scattering in the dirt. Have it your way, kid, he snarled. You'll regret this. He started toward me. I didn't back down. I stood my ground, right there on the spot my grandfather had built for me. I was terrified, but I was also filled with a strange, exhilarating clarity. This was my fight. He lunged, reaching for me. I did the only thing I could think of. I swung the heavy metal flashlight as hard as I could, not at him, but at the storm lantern still sitting on the table. The flashlight connected with a crash of shattering glass. The lantern exploded in a shower of sparks and burning kerosene. The flame caught on the scattered $100 bills on the floor. They went up with a sudden whoosh, a brilliant, shocking flare of orange light. Both men yelled and jumped back. shielding their faces from the heat. The fire was burning hot and fast, consuming the money, turning my inheritance into ash and smoke. "My money!" Henderson screamed, his greed overriding his sense. He stomped at the flames, trying to save the cash. In that moment of chaos, I acted. I didn't run for the stairs. I ran for the pot-bellied stove. I grabbed the handle of the heavy iron door and yanked it open. Inside, it was still full of the kindling and paper my grandfather had left, ready to be lit. I grabbed the book of matches from my pocket, struck one, and tossed it inside. The dry paper caught instantly. Then I grabbed the tin of kerosene from the toolbox. I ran back toward the stairs, and as the two men were still distracted by the fire on the floor, I unscrewed the cap and threw the entire contents of the tin into the open stove. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. A fireball erupted from the stove with a deafening roar, a plume of smoke and flame belching out into the room. The stovepipe leading up to the ceiling glowed red. The room filled with thick, acrid smoke. The big man and Henderson screamed, this time in real terror. They scrambled for the stairs, coughing and choking, their greed forgotten. They stumbled over each other in their haste to escape the smoke-filled bunker. I followed them up, staying low to the ground where the air was clearer. They burst out into the clean, cold night air, gasping for breath. I emerged right behind them, the flashlight still in my hand. I stood at the top of the cellar steps, framed by the smoke pouring out from below. "Get off my land," I said, my voice raw from the smoke. They stared at me, their faces pale with fear and fury in the moonlight. They looked from me to the smoking cellar, then back at me. I wasn't a scared kid anymore. In their eyes, I was something wild, unpredictable, and dangerous. Someone willing to burn $10,000 just to make a point. The big man grabbed Henderson's arm. "Come on, it's not worth it. The kid's crazy." They turned and ran, stumbling through the dark woods toward their waiting SUV. I watched them go, my chest heaving, my body shaking with adrenaline. I heard their car doors slam, the engine roar to life, and then the sound of tires spinning on the icy lane as they sped away. And then, silence. I was alone again. The smoke began to clear from the cellar, drifting up into the starry sky. The fire on the floor had burned itself out, leaving behind a black, ugly scorch mark and a pile of feathery ash. My inheritance was gone. $10,000 turned to smoke. I sank to my knees in the snow, the cold seeping into my jeans. I had won. I had driven them off. But what had it cost me? I had nothing. No, that wasn't right. I had less than nothing. I had a debt of $160 to the county, a smoke-damaged bunker, and an enemy in a powerful development company. I started to laugh. It was a ragged, hysterical sound. I had just set fire to a fortune because of a principle. It was the dumbest and the bravest thing I had ever done. For the first time, I felt the full weight of the choice I had made. I hadn't just chosen to stay, I had chosen to fight. Slowly, I got to my feet. The cold was starting to get to me. I went back down into the cellar. The smoke was still thick, but it was clearing. The fire in the stove had died down to a steady, warm glow. The room was no longer just a shelter. It was a battlefield. My battlefield. I spent the rest of that night cleaning up. I swept up the ashes of the money and threw them outside. The smell of smoke was thick in the air, a reminder of what had happened. I sat by the warm stove, wrapped in one of my grandfather's wool blankets, and I thought. I had no money. I had no plan. But I had a place to stand, and I had a story to tell. They thought I was a ghost, a non-entity they could brush aside. They were about to find out that ghosts can haunt you. The next morning I walked back into Haven. The 3-mile trek felt different this time. I wasn't a lost boy anymore. I was a man with a purpose. I went straight to the library. It was small, but it had a public computer. I spent hours online, searching for Mountain View Development, LLC. I found their corporate filings, the names of their board members, and a string of articles about their aggressive acquisition tactics in other rural communities. They were bullies, buying up family farms and pressuring small landowners with frivolous lawsuits until they gave in. Then I searched for pro bono legal aid for property disputes. It took 3 days of phone calls from the payphone outside the grocery store. Most of the city lawyers I called weren't interested in a broke teenager fighting a big developer over a root cellar. But finally, I got a call back from a woman named Ms. Albright. She was a lawyer from an environmental law group that specialized in fighting irresponsible development. She had heard of Mountain View. She didn't like them. "So let me get this straight, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice sharp and intelligent over the phone. "You're 18 years old. You're living in an underground bunker your grandfather built. And you're telling me you turned down a $15,000 offer from Mountain View and then chased their representatives off your property by setting your inheritance on fire?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, feeling foolish as I said it out loud. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I thought she was going to hang up. Then I heard a dry chuckle. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I think I'd like to take your case." That phone call was the beginning of everything. Miss Albright was a force of nature. She filed an injunction against Mountain View for harassment and trespassing. She had a surveyor come out who confirmed my property lines, and, more importantly, discovered that the only viable access to a large portion of Mountain View's planned development was through an old, forgotten easement that ran directly across my 0.7 acres. My grandfather, it turned out, had not just left me a fortress, he'd left me a strategic choke point. My worthless scrap of land had suddenly become very, very valuable. The fight wasn't easy. Mountain View's lawyers were relentless. They sent me threatening letters. They tried to challenge the validity of my grandfather's deed. They tried to have my property condemned by the county for code violations. But with Ms. Albright guiding me, I met them at every turn. I learned how to work. I got a job washing dishes at the diner in Haven. The owner, a gruff man named Sal, hired me after hearing my story from the waitress. The pay was terrible, but it came with a hot meal at the end of every shift. I saved every dollar I could. In my off hours, I worked on my home. I scrubbed the smoke stains from the concrete walls until my arms ached. I aired out the mattresses and blankets. I learned how to use the tools my grandfather had left me. I fixed the sagging roof on the decoy shack. I built shelves for the canned goods. I cut and split the deadfall in the woods for firewood. Every swing of the axe, every nail I hammered, felt like I was honoring him. I was making his gift into a real home. The people in Haven started to notice. The old man from the diner who had called me a fool brought me a bag of fresh vegetables from his garden. The woman from the county clerk's office dropped off a box of old National Geographic magazines for me to read. Sal let me take home leftover food. They were small gestures, but they were everything. I had spent years feeling invisible inside the system. Here, in this tiny town, people saw me. They saw my fight, and they respected it. I was no longer an outsider. I was becoming part of the community. One evening, after a long shift at the diner, I was walking back to my land. It was spring, and the world was coming alive again. The trees were budding, and the air smelled of damp earth and new growth. As I got closer, I saw a light shining from my property. For a second, my heart seized with fear, thinking Henderson and his goons had come back. But this was a different light. A warm, steady light. It was coming from the window of the shack. I had installed a small solar panel and a battery, just enough to power a single light bulb. I had fixed the window. From the outside, it looked like a small, humble cabin, glowing in the twilight. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't the grand farmhouse my grandfather had lost. It was a tiny shack over a concrete room, built in secret by a man with nothing left but his love and his fear. It was a place born of failure and shame, but it had become my salvation. I thought about the word inheritance. I used to think it meant money, property, things you were given, but I was wrong. My grandfather's real inheritance wasn't the $10,000 I had burned. It wasn't even the land itself. It was the choice he gave me. The chance to stand up and fight for something. The lesson that the value of a thing isn't what someone is willing to pay for it, but what it means to you. He had given me a home, not just a house. He had given me a purpose. He had given me back myself. The legal battle with Mountain View would drag on for another year, but in the end, we would win. They couldn't build their resort without access through my land, and I refused to sell. They eventually abandoned the project, selling their holdings to a conservation trust. My little fortress had saved a whole valley, but all of that was still in the future. On that spring evening, standing in the woods, looking at the light in my window, I knew I had already won the only battle that mattered. I had found my place to stand. And that's the story. It's the story of how a $40 root cellar became my entire world. It's a story about how the things that look worthless can sometimes hold the most value, and how the greatest gifts don't always come wrapped in shiny paper. They come in the form of a key, a promise, and a choice. So I want to ask you, what does home mean to you? Is it a place, a person, a feeling? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, because your stories, your struggles, and your victories are what build this community. This isn't just my story, it's a conversation we're all a part of. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own little piece of the world, consider subscribing and joining us, because we all need a place to stand. And sometimes, the best way to find it is to build it together. Thank you for listening.